If you want your podcast to be successful, one of the most important things that you need to do is make great podcast artwork. It's your listeners' first impression when they discover your show and really sets the tone for what people can expect when they subscribe. So in this video, we're gonna talk about how to make sure your podcast really stands out and also how to easily create stunning artwork inside of Buzzsprout if you're not a graphic designer.
Here we go.
When it comes to designing podcast artwork, as opposed to any other kind of internet graphic that you'll see on social media or YouTube or anything like that, are 5 key things. The first one is you want the design to be simple. You don't want it to be too complex, too crowded, too many things going on. You want someone to be able to look at your podcast artwork and know immediately what kind of podcast you have, what the name of your podcast is, and what they can expect when they listen to it. So if you have a podcast about dogs, you should probably have a picture of a dog somewhere on your podcast artwork. If you have a podcast about marriage and relationships, that should be displayed very simply and very clearly with your artwork. You want someone to see your artwork and feel like they know what your podcast is about. Because remember, people are scrolling through on their phones, they're browsing. They're not going through and just like dissecting every single podcast to see, is this one I should listen to? Is this one I should listen to? They're looking for things that jump out at them. And so if they're kind of in the mindset of, oh yeah, I do want to kind of see a new marriage podcast, that might be helpful for me. And then yours pops up and it's very clearly the thing they're looking for, there's a higher likelihood they're gonna click on it and listen to an episode. So you want your podcast artworks designed to be simple. Along those lines, you also want to use contrasting colors to help make your artwork pop off of the screen. If all of the colors that you're using are pretty close to each other, we're talking like blue and purple put together and maybe like a little bit of green or a bunch of orange, red, yellow tones, then especially as you get to a smaller size, it's just gonna start blending together. And so if again, you're trying to jump off the screen and make it really easy for someone to see and understand what your podcast is about, using contrasting colors to really make it very clear and legible what your podcast artwork is trying to communicate, that's really gonna help people see your artwork, help it stand out, and decide, okay, that is something I wanna listen to. The third thing that you need to make sure that you test for is that your artwork still looks good when it's super tiny. Because remember, most people are gonna see your podcast first on their phone, and not even like full screen on your phone, like this little itty bitty box on their phone, and you're surrounding your artwork with a bunch of other artwork. And so if you design your artwork full screen on a computer or a laptop and it's like 10 inches big, then it might look good at that size. But if you shrink it down really small, you wanna make sure you can still understand what's going on. So test it at different sizes, look at it on your phone, put it farther away from you on your desk, anything to kind of test and see, is this something that still makes sense at a really small size? Because that's gonna make or break whether somebody looks at your podcast, understands what it's about, and decides to follow it and start listening to episodes. The fourth thing you need to do is limit the number of words on your podcast artwork. Now this might sound like super weird, like what do you mean limit the number of words? If you have too many words on your podcast artwork, it feels cluttered. It's hard to know what to look at, what to focus on, what's important, not important, and it ends up just being something that people scroll past. And so if you have the name of your podcast, the first, last, and middle names and the suffixes of every single host that's on the podcast, a tagline, a website, now it just becomes a bunch of text that nobody can make heads or tails of. So limit the text that's on your artwork to like the name of your podcast, and that's it. So in addition to any design elements that you wanna include, pictures, graphics, limit the number of words that show up in your podcast artwork. And then the last thing that you need to be aware of, and these are more technical details, but nonetheless very important, is you wanna make sure that your podcast artwork aspect ratio is a square. I don't know how square this is, that's kind of rectangular, but a square, meaning the width and the height are the same dimension, because that is what podcast apps and directories like Apple Podcasts and Spotify want your artwork to be. They've created all the formatting around your podcast artwork to be square. So make sure it is a square. And the recommended size that we tell most people to use is 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. That means that if it's really small or if it's really, really big, like you just happen to have podcasters and listeners that listen to your show on a television, it's still gonna look good, even blown up to that big size. You'll also wanna save it as a PNG or a JPEG file. All right, none of these weird file formats. PNG or JPEG is the file format you wanna use for your podcast artwork. That's gonna make podcast apps happy with you when you submit your artwork. That's gonna keep your artwork from getting rejected and make sure that no matter how big or small your podcast shows up on somebody's screen, it still looks good. So those are the things that you'll need to do in order to make your podcast artwork stand out in podcast apps and really attract your listeners to your show. Now, if you aren't a professional graphic designer that already knows how to make podcast artwork like this, and if you don't have a huge budget in order to hire a graphic designer, you may be wondering, well, what's the best solution for me? And we think that that solution is Canva. Canva.com is an online graphic design platform that has lots of templates and tools that you can use to create really nice graphics for free. They do have a pro plan if you want to unlock even more templates, but for most people, the free plan is actually really great. And to make it easier to use Canva to create your podcast artwork, we just integrated it with Buzzsprout. So if you host your podcast with Buzzsprout, there's a new feature in your podcast settings. All you have to do is go over to the podcast settings tab on your screen, scroll down to where you see your artwork, and then click the button that says Design Artwork with Canva. When you click that and you open up the screen, it'll ask you to log in. So if you have an existing user account with Canva, you can connect that, or you can sign in with Facebook or Google and get right into the design studio. And what's really cool about this feature is that right here on the screen within Buzzsprout, you have all these templates you can use. So you just scroll through, find one that you like, that you think really fits the vibe of what you're going for, that's kind of close to what you want. And then you can change the images, you can update the text to say whatever you want, you can move things around. And then once you have it exactly the way that you want it and really dialed in, you just click a button that says Send to Buzzsprout. And then Canva, using all of those technical details we just talked about, will send that podcast artwork to your Buzzsprout account. If you really are happy with it, you just click Save Podcast Info and you're done. That's your artwork. So if you're looking something that's really straightforward, easy to do, and is gonna make your podcast artwork stand out without having to use Photoshop or some other kind of professional design software, we think this new Canva feature within Buzzsprout is really gonna help you and your podcast. Now, if you are new to podcasting and this artwork piece is just one thing that you're focused on to get your podcast off the ground, make sure you watch our How to Start a Podcast in 2021 video, where we walk through exactly how to choose your podcast format, the gear that you need, how to get listed in directories. All of that stuff can be found in that video, and we had a lot of fun making it. So to watch that video, you can either click the link in the video description below, or you can just click this image right here of me making this super goofy face, and you can watch that video with everything you need to start your podcast. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and until next time, keep podcasting.